My annual barbecue cook-off has been the highlight of my summer. What started as a small gathering of friends and family had evolved into a full-fledged neighborhood event, drawing people from nearby streets and beyond. The smell of smoked ribs, sizzling burgers, and grilled vegetables wafted through the air, and laughter echoed through the yard. It was more than just a cook-off, it was a celebration of community, food, and fun. This year felt even more special. After months of hard work, I had finally restored the old grill smoker that had been passed down in my family for generations. It wasn't just about winning anymore, it was about sharing the tradition with everyone I could. I had a full roster of neighbors, some new, some old, who were eager to show off their culinary skills. The event had always been open to anyone willing to bring a dish, and the more, the merrier. We'd set up tables, tents, and even a few yard games. The kids ran around with water balloons, while the adults fired up the grills. There was music, a bit of dancing, and the hum of conversation that filled the air. Everything was perfect. This year, I was especially excited because it was the first year in months I had been able to slow down and actually enjoy the festivities. The long workdays that had kept me busy for so long had finally come to a close, and I was ready to just enjoy being surrounded by good food and even better company. As the smoke rose from the grills, the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting a warm golden glow over the event. I was proud, not just of the food I had prepared, but of the community we had built around this simple tradition. It was the kind of event that brought people together, created memories, and built relationships. I couldn't think of a better way to spend a Saturday afternoon. But little did I know, this year's cook-off was about to take a turn. Because HOA Karen, the woman from the neighborhood who was always looking for reasons to complain, had other plans. And she wasn't about to let us have our fun without a fight. It started as a small, nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. As I flipped a few burgers on the grill, I noticed HOA Karen standing at the edge of my yard, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She was eyeing the festivities with that critical look I had become all too familiar with. Her pristine, over-manicured appearance stood in stark contrast to the laid-back, joyous atmosphere around her. I had seen her around the neighborhood before, always carrying that same air of superiority, as if the rules of the HOA were her personal law book. I had learned to avoid her whenever I could, but now, she was hard to ignore. A few minutes passed, and I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to find Karen standing there, her lips pressed into a thin line. "This is really getting out of hand," she said, her tone clipped. "You've got too many people here. The noise is ridiculous, and your property line is spilling over into the street. I've already had to walk around the entire block just to get here." I felt my heart sink. I've heard it all before. "Karen, it's just a cook-off. It's the neighborhood's annual event. Everyone's having a good time." Her eyes narrowed as she glanced around at the groups of people mingling, eating, and laughing. "I don't care if it's an annual event. The covenant clearly states that any gathering over 10 people requires approval. And I'm not approving this." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check. Karen wasn't the type to understand the spirit of a neighborhood gathering. She was more concerned about rules and regulations than community and tradition. "You're not approving it? Karen, it's a neighborhood gathering. People are just enjoying themselves," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Nobody's causing a disturbance. This is exactly what we're supposed to do, to bring people together." She ignored my words and glanced at the speakers playing light background music, shaking her head. "This isn't just about noise. It's the fact that you've got people from all over here, and you've gone over the capacity. You're violating several clauses in the HOA's rules." Before I could respond, she pulled out her phone and started typing furiously. My stomach dropped. I knew exactly what was coming. "I'm calling 911, she announced, already dialing the number with her eyes still on me. "This is an illegal gathering, and I'll have to get the authorities involved to shut it down." I was speechless. I'd been dealing with Karen's complaints about the HOA rules for years, but this was new, calling 911 on a community barbecue. She wasn't just trying to police the fun, she was trying to destroy it. As she made the call, I walked back toward the grill, trying to stay calm. I could feel the tension building. The music had barely been playing for a couple of hours, and the event was in full swing. It was meant to be a celebration, but now it was about to become something else entirely, an emergency in Karen's eyes. I tried to reason with her, but she was already too far gone. My neighbors, blissfully unaware of the unfolding drama, continued to laugh and talk, oblivious to the fact that Karen was about to escalate things. As she finished the call and tucked her phone into her pocket, I turned to her one last time, trying to keep my voice steady. Karen, this is ridiculous. You don't have to call the cops over a neighborhood cook-off. She shot me a glare, her face hardened with an air of finality. I've already called them, and they'll be here any minute. You'll see what happens when you break the rules. And just like that, my annual cook-off was no longer about good food and community. It was now a situation. And I had no idea how far Karen was willing to take it. The anticipation in the air was thick, as my stomach churned with dread. A cook-off, which was supposed to be a simple, joyous occasion, had now become a legal battleground thanks to Karen's phone call. I could see the group of people in the yard starting to glance around, noticing Karen's tense stance and murmurs beginning to spread. Just as I was about to walk over to reassure everyone that things were under control, the sound of sirens echoed in the distance, growing louder by the second. The crowd, now unsure of what was happening, began to quiet down, and I watched as 2 police cars pulled up in front of my driveway. The officers stepped out with calm, authoritative expressions, seemingly unfazed by the spectacle unfolding before them. The first officer, a young woman with a no-nonsense attitude, looked directly at me and then at Karen, who had already stepped forward, prepared to make her case. Is there a problem here? The officer asked, her tone neutral but firm. Karen immediately launched into her complaint, pointing at the crowd, the grills, and even the speakers, which were now off and silent. Yes, officer. There's an illegal gathering going on here. The property owner didn't get permission for this event, and they're violating several HOA rules. It's loud, overcrowded, and I'm sure there are people here who haven't even registered with the HOA. The officer glanced at me, and I could see the confusion in her eyes. She clearly wasn't sure how an annual neighborhood barbecue could be considered an illegal gathering. I stepped forward, keeping my voice as calm as I could manage. Officer, this is just a neighborhood cook-off that we've been doing for years. It's something we do every summer, and we've never had an issue before. There's no need for 911 to be involved. The officer nodded slowly and turned to Karen. Ma'am, I understand you're concerned, but calling 911 is for emergencies. This doesn't seem like an emergency. Are you saying there's a disturbance? Karen crossed her arms, an air of superiority settling over her. I'm saying there's a violation of HOA regulations, and if they don't shut this down, there'll be bigger problems. This isn't a small gathering, and it's way past the point of getting approval. The officer didn't respond right away. She looked back at her partner, who was observing the crowd, probably noting the lack of chaos or loud noise. She then turned back to me, still holding a calm demeanor. You're allowed to have events in your yard, as long as they don't disrupt the peace or violate local ordinances. From what I see, there's no issue with noise or crowd control, the officer said. But I would recommend working with your HOA to resolve any future concerns. The tension that had been building inside me finally started to ease. The officer was clearly seeing this for what it was, a community gathering, not a crime scene. Karen, however, was far from satisfied. She turned to the officers with a look of frustration. I'm telling you, this can't go on. It's disrespecting the community. The second officer, a tall man with an easygoing expression, stepped in at that point. Ma'am, it's clear there's no law being broken here. If you'd like to file a complaint with the HOA, that's fine, but we can't act on personal grievances unless something more serious happens. He turned to me. We'll just make sure everything is okay here, but there's no need to cancel your event. Keep the noise reasonable and everything should be fine. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. This wasn't the disaster Karen had hoped for. It seemed like the officers were ready to move on, and I could already feel the community beginning to breathe again. The police officers nodded toward me, signaling that everything would be fine, before heading back to their patrol cars. Karen stood, seething, as she watched them drive off, and for a brief moment, I thought she might try to cause more trouble. But when I looked over at the gathering, I saw the faces of my neighbors, smiling, laughing, and now more determined than ever to continue the cook-off. As the officers pulled away, the crowd erupted into applause. I was taken aback by how quickly things had turned around. Karen's attempt to shut us down had only made everyone more united. Neighbors who had never spoken came together, and for the rest of the day, it was as if nothing had ever happened. We were all celebrating, enjoying good food, and creating memories that would last far longer than Karen's complaints. As the sun began to set, I leaned back against the grill, watching the horizon. This cook-off, which had almost been taken from us, had now become a victory, not just for me, but for the entire neighborhood. The spirit of community had triumphed over division, and Karen was left with nothing but an empty complaint and a damaged reputation. The cook-off continued without a hitch, and it felt sweeter than any other year. We had won not just against Karen, but against the fear of authority, the pressure to conform, and the idea that one person could ruin something for an entire community. We were free to live our lives together. The rest of the evening went off without a hitch. The tension from Karen's earlier intervention faded, replaced by the sounds of laughter, clinking glasses, and the crackling of the fire pit. The cook-off continued, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude for my neighbors, many of whom came over to offer support and reassurance after the police had left. But just as I thought the worst was behind me, Karen made her next move. Around an hour after the police had departed, I spotted her in the distance, walking across the street, her posture rigid and determined. At first, I thought she might be leaving, but then I saw her stop near the sidewalk, turn around, and march straight toward the grill area. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. My instincts told me that she wasn't done with this event, not by a long shot. And sure enough, as she approached, she launched into a new tirade. "You've made a mockery of everything this neighborhood stands for," she called, her voice raised and dripping with indignation. "This is completely unacceptable. You've disrespected the HOA's rules, and I'm not going to let this slide anymore." I stood up straight, now fully prepared for whatever she had in store. "Karen," I said, holding up my hand to stop her before she could escalate any further. "The police have already been here, and they clearly said everything was fine. This event is legal, and it's done. I'm not going to entertain this anymore." Her eyes narrowed, but she pressed on, her voice dripping with malice. "You might have gotten away with it this time, but I'll make sure it doesn't happen again. I'll be filing complaints with the HOA board, the city council, anyone I can. I'll make sure you don't get away with this." I crossed my arms, not backing down. "Go ahead. I'm not scared of your complaints. The police have already cleared everything up, and you're the one who looks like the bad guy here, Karen. You called 911 on a community barbecue. You've made a scene, and you've turned everyone against you." She froze, visibly stunned by the shift in tone. The crowd, which had been hovering nearby, now turned their attention to Karen. I could see the shift happening in their expressions. Their tolerance for her antics was wearing thin. Her complaints about violations didn't seem to carry much weight now that the police had validated the event. She was quickly losing any influence she had once held. I continued, now speaking more confidently, my voice loud enough for the crowd to hear. "You've tried to ruin something we all love, something that brings us together. This cook-off isn't just about food, it's about community. And you've disrespected that. I've had enough of your negativity. Maybe it's time for you to move on." Karen's face turned bright red, a mixture of anger and embarrassment flashing across her features. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, one of the other neighbors, a man named Bob, stepped forward. "Karen, you need to calm down," Bob said, his voice even but firm. "This community supports each other. You can't just come in here and throw your weight around like this." He wasn't the only one. A few more neighbors, all of whom had been quietly watching from a distance, began chiming in. "That's right," said Tina, another neighbor. "We've been doing this cook-off for years, and we don't need you trying to shut it down every time something doesn't suit your standards." Karen stood there for a moment, speechless, as more people rallied behind me. The crowd's unity in the face of her disruption had completely caught her off guard. Slowly, she turned and walked away, muttering something under her breath that I couldn't quite make out. As Karen retreated from the gathering, I felt a deep sense of relief. Victory wasn't just about keeping the cook-off going. It was about showing that the community had the power to stand up to one person's attempt to disrupt everything. The crowd's support had been the final blow. Karen had lost her grip on any authority she thought she had. People went back to enjoying the cook-off, but now with a renewed sense of camaraderie. We all knew that we had just taken a stand, not just for the cook-off, but for the idea of community itself. It wasn't just my win. It was a win for everyone who had ever felt bullied or pushed aside by someone who thought their rules were the only ones that mattered. As the evening wore on and the stars twinkled above, I couldn't help but reflect on what had just transpired. Karen had tried to break the spirit of the event, but instead, she had brought us closer together. And as we all shared plates of food, laughed, and told stories under the night sky, I realized that no HOA, no Karen, no amount of rules could ever truly take away what we had built here. The next day, I sent out a thank you message to everyone who had attended, making sure to emphasize how much their support had meant. No one was going to let a small-minded complainer ruin what we had. And for the first time that summer, as I sat back and thought about the event, I felt at peace. The community had shown its strength, and I knew it would stand strong again if anything like this ever came up again. Karen had learned a valuable lesson. You can't bully the wrong guy, especially when the whole community is backing them up. The next morning, after the dust had settled from the cook-off and Karen's dramatic exit, I began receiving messages and calls from nearly everyone who had attended the event. The support was overwhelming, and it seemed like everyone in the neighborhood had something to say about the incident. Neighbors who had stayed quiet for years, simply observing the HOA's grip on things, were now voicing their frustrations. People who had never attended the cook-off before were reaching out to thank me for standing up to Karen, and many expressed their desire to join in the next one, showing that our community had started to rally together. In a way, it was like the cook-off had ignited something that had been simmering beneath the surface for a long time. The neighbors, who had long felt powerless in the face of Karen's constant meddling, were now ready to push back. They were no longer willing to let her or the HOA dictate their lives. A few days later, I found myself meeting with a group of neighbors at Bob's house. Bob, who had been one of the first to speak up during the confrontation, had invited everyone to talk about what had happened and to discuss how we could move forward. What started as a casual conversation turned into a full-fledged meeting about the future of the neighborhood. "We can't just let Karen think she can keep pushing us around," Bob said, standing up and addressing the group. "The HOA, with all their rules and regulations, has been running this neighborhood like they own it. But they don't. This is our community, and it's time we take a stand." The room was filled with murmurs of agreement, and people began speaking up one by one. "I've been in this neighborhood for years, and every time I've tried to make a small change to my property, they've been all over me," said Tina, the neighbor who had supported me at the cook-off. "It's time to fight back. We're more than just a bunch of people living in houses. They're trying to tell us what we can and can't do with our lives. We need to organize," I said, standing up. "What happened at the cook-off isn't just about me. It's about all of us. Karen's trying to run our lives, but the truth is, she has no power if we stick together. If we all show that we won't back down, she won't be able to use the HOA to control us." That night, the group made a plan. We agreed to stand together as a community, to push back against the HOA's overreach. A petition was started to officially challenge Karen's position on the HOA board, and we decided to take action, not just against her, but against the unfair rules the HOA had been imposing for years. We would no longer be passive in the face of her constant meddling. We'd bring awareness to the problems she caused, share our stories with the rest of the neighborhood, and make sure that everyone understood that we didn't have to accept her brand of control. The next few weeks were filled with more meetings, petitions, and discussions. We gathered signatures, made our voices heard, and started to see real change happening. The support for the community rally grew, and the group that had once been scattered, uncertain, and quiet became a united force. People who had been silent for too long were now speaking up. I noticed that the next time Karen tried to enforce the HOA's rules, she did it with much less confidence. She would come around with her clipboard and try to impose fines, but this time, neighbors stood up to her. One by one, they pushed back, challenging her authority and refusing to comply with unjust rules. Then came the official HOA meeting where Karen was scheduled to address her complaints about the neighborhood. This was going to be a big moment. The whole neighborhood had rallied together, and we were all set to attend the meeting and finally confront the HOA board about their mismanagement. When the meeting started, I was ready. I had the support of the neighborhood behind me, and I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Karen tried to take charge, but this time, the room wasn't on her side. I took a deep breath as I stood up and addressed the board. Good evening, everyone. As you all know, Karen has tried to control this community for far too long, and it's time we take back our right to live freely. We are not here to be controlled by one person's personal agenda. We are here to create a community that supports each other, not one that tears us apart with unnecessary rules. I could feel the energy shift in the room. The board members looked uncomfortable, and Karen's face turned an alarming shade of red as I spoke. People who had stayed silent for years were now standing with me, nodding in agreement. This was the moment we had been waiting for. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of changes in the neighborhood. The HOA was forced to address the issues we'd raised, and they had no choice but to reconsider some of their more restrictive policies. Karen, who had once ruled over everyone with an iron fist, now found herself isolated and undermined by the very community she had tried to control.